Okay. Oh, we might get going. It's just on 12 o'clock, and I'm conscious of time. So thank you to those that have joined our webinar today. This is the first time the Catchment Group has done a webinar, so it's going to be great to give it a go and see if it's a good way to help get our information across to the people in our catchment. For those that don't know me, I'm Steph Scott, and I'm the coordinator with the East Otago Catchment Group. The catchment group was formed in 2019 and covers 5 catchments, as you can see on the map there in front of you, which covers a total of about 112,000 hectares. This webinar today is set to run for an hour and is recorded, so I will send out the link in the next few days and we will put it up on our website eventually as well. There's going to be a presentation on each catchment and what we have come to learn over the past kind of year about the water quality in each catchment. We're going to move from a north to south direction, so we're going to start in the Waihemo Shag and finish in the Waikouaiti. And at the end, we've planned, hopefully all running smoothly, about 10 minutes for questions. So if you've got questions during the course of the presentation, can you just put these in the chat box, please? And we will go through these at the end. Thanks, Juliet. Next slide. So before we start, I just want to quickly thank our presenters. So we've got Juliet Milne presenting today. Juliet is from Traverse Environmental and is an applied environmental scientist with expertise in fresh and coastal water quality. So we tasked Juliet probably about a year ago about analysing all the data on our 4 catchments as part of the East Otago Catchment Group and preparing quite big technical reports for the Waikouaiti and the Waihemo Shag catchments on the water quality, and then also helping us with Stony Creek and Post Office Creek to understand what is going on in those catchments. We've also got Solis Norton from Whirika in Dunedin. Solis is a senior environmental and biophysical systems specialist and was heavily involved in the Hakapupu catchment restoration project that's been going for the last few years. So he has great knowledge about the water quality in this area. And then Nick McGruther is also presenting. She'll be a familiar face to many of you. She's been the main facilitator of our Farming with Confidence program, supporting me with rolling out that work, and her expertise and really includes understanding water quality and how as farmers we can sort of understand these issues and implement solutions. So, and I'd also like to really thank our funder for this work, which is MPI. So in 2023, we were successful with an application to MPI and their Integrated Farm Planning Fund. This has enabled us to roll out our Farming with Confidence program over the last few years and also use the funding to develop resources around water quality and biodiversity. So this webinar today is to present the findings of the water quality work. And obviously to understand the water quality in the area, we need to analyse all the data that's out there. So the organisations that you see on the screen today have been very generous and shared their data with us and trusted us with this information. So we'd really like to thank them for doing this. So I'm going to pass over now to Juliet. She is going to start us on the Waihemo Shag and the work that she undertook there and what she came to understand. Thanks, Juliet.
Right, thanks, Steph, and kia ora koutou. Yes, we'll start with the Waihemo Shag Catchment and just a little bit of background to the catchment and all the monitoring information that exists, and then look at the river water quality. Now, one of the things you'll see through the series of presentations today is that all of these rivers have estuaries at the bottom, and so it's to look at the system as a whole is really important because the health of the estuary reflects the health of the river and the entire catchment. So we will touch on in all the presentations what we know about the estuaries as well. And the diagram on the right is really just there for purposes of a lot of people talk about water quality, and to me as a water quality scientist, it's very focused at times on physical, chemical, and microbiological water quality. But when you're looking at the health of a stream, and indeed the health of an estuary. There's a lot more to it. It's just different components. And so where possible, we did look at information on these other components as well. So Steph's already alluded to why we did this work, what I was asked to do. It was about finding out about water quality state and trends across the catchment. And on this slide, we've got just an outline of the catchment for the Waihemo Shag, and obviously its headwaters are right up at Kakanui Peak, over 1,500 metres above sea level, and it flows down that hill country and then on into the lower valley, with Deepdale Creek is the main tributary. Like all of the East Otago catchments, there's so many special values, cultural, ecological, recreational, and in terms of some of the ecology as well. I mean, the headwater streams are home to the Tari flathead galaxis, which is a very special species in Otago. We've got trout and inaka spawning in the catchment. Of course, Waitaki District takes drinking water supplies to townships in there as well. And even at the bottom, we've got a regionally significant wetland within the estuary as well. One of the reasons of looking at the catchment overview, and those of you that live in the catchment or are connected with it in some way will be very familiar with a lot about the catchment, but it's just the fact that catchment characteristics matter when it comes to the health of a river in an estuary, the climate, the type of flows, the geology, and the land use in particular. They all shape what happens in the ecological systems. And then at a more local scale, you get those sort of landscape factors like the slope and types of soil. So we're dealing with a really, across all of East Otago, a cool, dry climate. The rainfall is often sort of sporadic and unreliable. And I know that the soil moisture often goes into deficit for several months a year. We've got that schist-dominated hill country, but more sort of younger sedimentary and alluvial materials in the lower catchment, where you've also got the more fertile soils along the river valley. So we've got these perfect mix really for creating a catchment with contrasting land stability and erosion risk. In terms of the hydrology, the river's really quite variable. It has its highest flows in winter, which probably isn't a surprise, and its lowest flows in summer or autumn. And it really just sort of reflects the rainfall and the evapotranspiration cycle. But the river, I think the important point is the river's prone to both extended low flows and significant flood events. So you get quite widely variation in those flows. But the other important thing about this catchment, which makes it unique compared with the other catchments in the East Otago catchment group area, is this area down the bottom, which is the shallow alluvium aquifer. There's a very close connection between the river and that groundwater underneath. And in fact, the river does lose and gain flow to the ground to and from groundwater, and it's quite apt that the name of the river, for the Maori name Waihemo, referring to a river that has gone away. You'll all be familiar with the land use. Sheep and beef dominates, but there is quite a bit of forestry in places in the catchment, and there's some cropping and dairying in the lower reaches. And of course, significant activity in the catchment is the Oceana gold mine up at Macrae's. And of course, we've got a few urban areas as well, particularly down in Palmerston. And I've mentioned that water's abstracted from the aquifer for drinking water, but a lot of the other water taken in the catchment from the river and the aquifer is for irrigation purposes. So just to have a look at what sort of monitoring information exists, this catchment compared to the other four is the richest in terms of information that's available, particularly in terms of the resources that the Otago Regional Council has put in. Now, mostly the monitoring are traditionally focused downstream of Dunback, and we have these sites, these long-term water quality and ecological monitoring sites in the river. One is Craig Road, flows also monitored here and upstream, but also a site called Goodwood Pump, which is at Chisholm Road. So these have been monitored for a long time, but we do have now as well, we've got groundwater quality in the bottom. That's been monitored for quite a long time. The bores have changed over time, and the estuary's been monitored as well. And then We've also got, in more recent years, the Otago Regional Council added a site up in the headwaters at State Highway Culvert. So that's given us 3 sites down the catchment, which we'll look at the results for shortly. There's also soil quality that's monitored on different land uses in the catchment as well. And that's the ORC's monitoring, but we also have a lot of other routine monitoring, and Oceana Gold is a big collector of data, monthly water quality at 14 sites, and I think the aquatic invertebrates every 3 months. Most of those sites are concentrated in the Deepdale Creek subcatchment. And in the bottom of the catchment, Waitaki District Council has got monitoring of the shallow groundwater because of the requirements under drinking water regulations to monitor that. And also has some monitoring in relation to the Palmerston wastewater treatment plant, which discharges to land adjacent to the lower reaches of the river. So quite a lot of information that we could draw on to pull together. On top of that as well, the ORC has carried out a lot of investigations over recent decades. Probably not time to go through them all. I guess the most significant one for this talk is really the work that started around 2017, where it was intensive investigation in the lower catchment to try and understand the interaction between the shallow aquifer and the river, and to estimate how nitrogen moves between the land, the groundwater, and the river. So there was drilling of 8 bores, there was hydraulic testing, water level, water quality monitoring with 8 river sites and 8 bores. The water was aged as well to see whether it was young or old water. And there were sensors put into the river, these are these orange triangles here, which measured nitrate levels in near real time. There's also been a lot of other work done as well around nutrient losses from farms and the treatment plants. So it's all a big information data set that we can pull together, which I guess nicely takes me to what are some of the key findings. So I'm just going to run through really quickly some of the core indicators of water quality. So if we think about sediment, and those of you familiar with the river will know that it runs clear at base flows, good clarity. We do have some areas where fine sediment settles onto the bed of the rivers, which isn't great for the ecology. That's more so in the upper tributaries, and we'll talk more about that shortly. But I guess the important point is that you will have all lived and seen this, that you get some significant flooding at time. So this is in the lower catchment in 2013. And of course, when you go out and grab water samples once a month, you very rarely coincide with these wet weather events. So it's just, they're important because that's when the big bulk of the contaminants pass through the system and end up downstream. In terms of nutrients, if we look at nitrogen, it's not uncommon to see nitrogen increase down the catchment. So what I've got here on this graph is just the median results from 5 years of monitoring, so about 60 data points, from the upstream side at State Highway Culvert down to Craig Road, just before the aquifer, and then down at Goodwood Pump, which is closely interacted with the underlying groundwater. So you see this step increase as you move down the catchment. But I just wanted to point out that if I put these dotted lines on the graph, these represent the national median nitrate level for rural river sites that are monitored across the country. This is data from LAWA, and it's really just to show you that those upper 2 sites are in the best 25% of monitored sites in New Zealand. And Goodwood Pump, although nitrate increases, it's still in the better half of sites that are monitored across New Zealand. So concentrations are low when you compare them against other rivers. But another bit of context, we've already hinted at the groundwater connection. I just wanted to put this up. This is the median groundwater and nitrate concentration in one of the bores. So you can see immediately that there's a lot more nitrogen in groundwater. That's to be expected. That's close contact with the soils above, and losses of nitrate through the soil will end up in that groundwater system. And of course, because that groundwater system is connected to the river, that injects nitrate into the river as well. The other pattern we see, this is very common in river systems, is that we will get a seasonal variation in concentration. So these are just the 3 sites. And what I've got here is the median concentrations. The total bar, the height of the bar represents the total amount of nitrogen. The light blue is the amount that's what we call plant available. the nitrogen that's readily available to cause problems like excess algal or plant growth in the stream. And you can just see again that pattern of it increases as you go down the catchment, but also you can see how much higher the nitrate concentrations, including the plant available nitrogen, is in the winter. When it comes to phosphorus, it's low. In fact, it's often not detected by the laboratory when it's measuring ORC samples for the State Highway 85 site. And you can see there on the lower graph, it's low compared to other rivers. It's what we call the limiting nutrient. Doesn't have the same seasonal pattern as nitrate. And then we look at pathogens. We actually measure E. coli as an indicator of the presence of potential pathogens. I haven't got any graphs on this one. I just wanted to say that the river is actually suitable for swimming most of the time, especially in the fine summer weather when people would likely want to swim in the river. There's a current 5-year median of 90 E. coli, which is pretty damn good for a river that has quite a bit of rural land use. And this 90 is referring to the site down the lower reaches. The other good news is that we can put data together over time and formally assess whether water quality is improving or degrading. It's hard to do that because sometimes sites have changed or methods have changed. But we do know from work that the ORC released in 2022 that the nutrient concentrations, particularly nitrogen and turbidity, had decreased in the 10-year period. And I also looked at the groundwater in a site that I believe is no longer monitored at Mill Road, and it also showed a decrease in available nitrogen. So that's that nitrate nitrogen. So that's a positive there in that you can't project that into the future, but there were signs that there had been a decrease. If we went back and looked at the 20-year period, it was actually the other way around. So there was actually degrading trends. So some good efforts have been done in the catchment, and I guess the work the ORC has done with landowners looking at losses of nitrogen from farms has been really valuable in that. Now, what about what lives in the streams? We've got quite a variation in the invertebrate health across the catchment. All of the sites, which is pleasing, support these dilithium mayflies, which fairly sensitive to water quality and habitat conditions. They've got caddisflies and we've got snails at all 3 sites. But the purpose of these next 2 slides is just to show you that look, in the upper reaches, we've got pristine water quality up there and some really good habitat conditions where we find stoneflies and other types of mayflies. And you can see these really fine, sensitive body parts. They like clear water, they like fast flowing, they like cool water and with good oxygenation. When you get down to Goodwood Pump, we're getting a lot more of sort of midges and beetles and that dominate the fauna, and that's because they are more tolerant of conditions where those waters are perhaps warmer and there's more sediment on the bottom and algae. And that takes me to this next point, that despite the low nutrient levels, because we've got a river that has extended low flows and it can get quite warm in the lower reaches, which I'll show you in a moment, we can get quite high levels of algae in the lower reaches, so down at that Chisholm Road area. We also find that we get lots of weed growth in some of the tributaries. This is through Oceana Gold's monitoring. So when we get lots of that algal growth and weed growth, that reduces the quality of the habitat for a lot of the aquatic invertebrates, and it isn't great for fish spawning either. But in saying that, in the lower reaches where the ORC monitors, the fish diversity is really high, and that's because there's really good passage as well through the estuary into the sea, because particularly redfin bully and eel, they need to spend part of their life cycle at sea, so they need to be able to get out to the sea and then back into the catchment. And of course, I mentioned earlier in the upper catchment, we've got the Tari flathead galaxis. We've also got coral or freshwater crayfish up in the upper catchment as well.
1 minute, Juliet.
Thanks. So just to say that the water does get warm and low, as I mentioned. Fortunately, even though we've got extended low flows, as the flow graph here, the temperature, the dissolved oxygen levels still remain mostly in a healthy range. That's not the case in some of the other catchments. We don't have much on water quality in the estuary, but we know it's rich in nitrogen that has been measured, and we know what's coming through from the Goodwood pump site. The estuary actually flushes every day. It's regular, so it actually reduces the risk of algal blooms. But we do know from monitoring the ORC's done that there is some pressure from the catchment sediment inputs. I've mentioned the high sediment that can come into the estuary. So in those wet weather events, we get significant loads of sediment entering. And when we get lots of fine sediment, we can lead to these unpleasant conditions, lots of algal growth and anoxic sediments, which aren't great for the beasties that want to live in there. So just the take-home message is excellent health in the upper reaches. It does shift as you move to the lower reaches. That is typical down any river catchment as you've got more inputs coming into the system, but water quality compares favourably with guidelines. It's safe to swim most of the time, high fish diversity. We want to look out for the lower reaches because we do have abundant nitrogen and we are seeing nuisance algae, and the low flows and warm temperatures contribute to that. Similarly, the estuary, it's in fairly good state, but it's largely being aided by the fact that the estuary is well flushed. And we need to keep an eye on sediment, particularly in the wet weather. So that's the overview. I'll move on from there because Nick will come back to the fact that erosion challenges in the catchment. We've got some future forest to be harvested. And as I mentioned, the lower river, we've got these are gaining and losing reaches. So we have these areas where the nitrogen and how that's managed close, particularly on the margins of the river, is going to be very important in this catchment. So Nick, I'll move on to Stony Creek. This is a short little presentation for this one, really, because it's probably the complete contrast of the Waihemo Shag. We don't have a lot of information. Very small catchment, just 9 kilometres squared on the eastern side of Palmerston, and it's rising off. It sort of has it rises on the seaward slopes of Puketapu, and it's joined by a couple of other small tributaries before it joins the main stem down at Anderson's Road and then enters into Stony Creek Lagoon, which I guess most of the locals refer to as Anderson's Lagoon. And if you are familiar with the area, there's not a lot of flow in the streams, especially in summer. This is photos I took earlier this year. Earth Sciences New Zealand estimate that, using New Zealand river maps, that the median flow is just 19 litres per second in the bottom reaches before it goes into the estuary, and that drops to 9 litres per second in low flows. We've got weak bedrock sediment and poorly drained soils in this catchment, so they're a challenge for management. The land use is very much sheep and beef, but the lagoon itself, popular area for duck hunting, fishing and walking. There's some values in the salt marsh. It's not classified as a regionally significant wetland, but it has important. Salt marsh is important. It's a valued estuarine habitat. It supports other species, nutrient cycling, and storage of carbon, which is a good thing for climate change mitigation. So, as I alluded to, we don't really know much about the health of the stream, but the lack of the flows will really limit what can live in the stream. In terms of the lagoon itself, it's not routinely monitored, but we do know things through university research and an assessment that the ORC commissioned. So the main thing with this lagoon is it's a tidal river lagoon, and normally a tidal river lagoon estuary is really well flushed, but that's not the case with Anderson's. It's got this very narrow mouth, and assessments of satellite images by Dr. Mark Schellenberg estimated that the mouth is closed about 96% of the time. So that has quite big implications for the health of the estuary. So from a distance, it doesn't really reveal all. When you get closer, you start to see what the challenges are, and that's just because that water can't exchange, and so we create I guess it's a bit like it's a very high risk of the water becoming enriched with nutrients and algae. We haven't got intensive land use, but that water can't get out. So it's a bit like a bathtub of water. It's used over and over without being replenished. And these photos I took on the 27th of February. see the significant growth of algae, and some of it's algal growth, and some of it's weed growth. These surface sediments are very black, which is a sign that there's no oxygen in the sediment. There's a lot of sort of mud here. That's not good conditions for the animals that live in the invertebrate community. There's been master's research that's showing that it tends to be amphipods that are the most common, these little crustaceans. And the communities of invertebrates living in the estuary is a lot less diverse than you see in the other estuaries in Otago that are open to the sea. We'll move on from there. So really just to say it's a challenging catchment, this one. One of the things that would be a good point for discussion is whether or not there's an opportunity to periodically open the lagoon. It does open in a really big flood event, but they don't happen often enough. And so you can see the difference in conditions that happen. So we know from elsewhere improving the opening of the flood would not just allow a sort of a resetting of the algal biomass and allow those nutrient concentrations to be flushed out, but it would also facilitate the migration of fish species in and out of the estuary. And so things like the eels, black flounder, mullet, and kahawai. And I will leave it there and hand over to you, Solace.
Great, thanks, Juliet. I'll just bring up this presentation here and we'll be into it.
So don't forget, folks, to pop any questions in the chat if you've got them.
All right, so I'm going to walk us through the Hakapupu Pleasant River Catchment. You'll see a lot of similarities with what Juliet's already said, but we're going to focus a little bit obtusely on the project that we have been undertaking there over the last 3 years. Just get this slide down thing working. That looks better. Right. So that's all looking all right at your end, Nick? Yeah, good. Okay. Yep. So we've had a fairly intensive focus in this area over the last several years, which sets it slightly apart from the other catchments that Juliet's been talking about. So the restoration project is run from 2022 through to 2025, and it was a collaboration between the East Otago Catchment Group, Kati Hoirapa Runaka at Puketaraki, and the Otago Regional Council. So the objective was to restore and enhance the Māori and health of the catchment, and water quality, of course, was a focus, particularly levels of sediment. So in short, the catchment covers around 13,000 hectares. It's about half now in commercial forestry and about half in moderate to lower intensity dry stock farming, including some deer farming, and there's very little, I think there's one dairy farm in the entire area. It has a reasonably low and patchy annual rainfall, and it has the estuary, which is the largest wetland in East Otago, and the evidence is that this area is under some stress. So the estuary itself is around 84 hectares, which is about half of its original size. The flat gates and causeways and grazing of the local agriculture have some impact on its health and its extent, but overall it's of a similar level of health to other estuarine systems in the coastal Otago area. So unlike the one that Juliet's just described, it's open to the sea, and so flushes with each tide, some amount with each tidal cycle. One of the interesting things that we did was to sample the water quality, not just when it's at or below median flow, but right through to, you can see over the right here, at some of the highest flow points during our 3-year period. We were in there taking water samples to see what the quality of the water looked like. And so that was one of the real strengths of what we managed to achieve over the last few years. The in-stream flows, the water quality is heavily driven by the amount of rainfall, also the topography.
Sorry to bother you, your slides just aren't changing.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Okay. So you guys, are you still on the first one?
We're still on the front page. Yep.
Right, let me just stop sharing and I'll try that again. Let's try this again. Sorry, I'll be dragging the chain on our timing. Nick, apologies in advance for that. Right, just put this one up again and all right, is that looking better?
Yes, thank you.
We're away now. Oh, okay. Apologies for that. Apologies for that. Okay, so we've talked quickly about the restoration project. Here's a snip of the overall layout of the catchment. So as I said, it's around 13,000 hectares in a mix of commercial forestry and farming. This is the quick description of the estuary wetland complex we've just described. And here we are where we were up to with this. This is an illustration of how our water sampling has taken place over the duration of the study. And with the red dots are where we've taken the samples, and the blue line is the blue dots, the flow measured at Patterson's Road. And so what you can see is really the flashy nature that Juliet's already alluded to with the other catchments, where for a big part of the time there's low flows or very steady low flows. I think median flow was around about half a cubic, but at times when we get these heavy rainfall events, the flow can increase by many thousands of times. In terms of sediment loads for one measure, but generally you can see that that has a flashy nature, even though for some long periods there's very little or no visible flow within the waterways. So here's a graphic of this. So an image taken from the same place at the Stenhouse Road Bridge of typical summer autumn type flows, and so there's very little flow there. That's just largely stationary water, and with high rainfall events on the other side. So relative to the national guidelines, the three main tributaries into the catchment, the Hakapupu was the nitrate that is above the 95th percentile bottom line, but the other two sub-catchments are within the general guidelines, and similar to what Juliet's already said, the phosphorus levels are very low. So but you can see the blue dots on the map here are where we were taking the samples from. And so that's over 16 samples taken between May 23 and March in 2025. So the sediment loads can vary by around about 150,000 times, depending on the amount of flow, which is really one of the main drivers of, as I've already mentioned, and it makes so for the year-to-year variation in that rainfall makes it quite challenging to say things conclusively about trends in the water quality, over multiple years. So we estimated the amount of sediment that moved through the catchment in 2 separate years, and this was with the help of Dr. Mark Schellenberg. And so in 2023-24, we reckoned that there was about 360 tonnes of sediment moving through the catchment. And then the following year, it was around 3 times greater at almost 1,000 tonnes. So that variation has obviously going to have a big impact on that year-to-year health of the water flows. The low dissolved oxygen levels were often apparent through the summer and the autumn. So we had real-time monitoring devices, AquaWatch Waka they were called, that we had in all of the catchments. And what I want to point out here is in this yellow bar towards the bottom there, and you can see through March, April, May, and June of 2024, the levels of dissolved oxygen were below 5 milligrams a mil, which is around about where they indicate that the stress will be occurring on aquatic organisms. So in those periods of low or no visible flow, that dissolved oxygen that's related to increased temperature as well will make life pretty hard for the aquatic organisms. Related to that is the habitat quality. As Juliet said, that it's not just about the water quality, it's about the stuff that's along the edges of the waterways as well. And at the 10 sites that we looked at, we found that the habitat quality was tended to be highest further up the catchments, where there was tended to be lower levels of modification, and then it declined as we got further down towards the more intensively used areas. So the project put some effort into helping enhance the stream sides with a lot of riparian planting. We put in over 90,000 plants over the course of the project and around 40 kilometres of fencing to keep the stock out of those areas and protect those young plants. So that refugia, those areas of shaded deep pools, really important places for those aquatic organisms during those long periods of low flows and when the conditions in other stretches of the rivers might be quite stressful.
1 minute.
So the fish numbers were moderate, and the main species we might have expected were present. And one of the curiosities of it was we've also detected European perch, so pest species, and that's the first reporting of that kind of fish in this area. We established, so another interesting part of the project is we established a fish ladder at Brooklands Road Ford, so that just for you to orient you, this is the red dot is the Brooklands Road Ford, and you can see it's kind of at the head of the estuary. So it kind of is it's a bridge. If the fish can't get out through the top of the estuary, most of the rest of the catchment is inaccessible to them. So there's a picture of what the culvert looked like before the project got involved with it, and you can see the rock ramp here, and it has this mussel spat rope through the middle of it, so you can see in the higher flows that there's plenty of scope for the fish to move up and through those tunnels, which are now they're not raised up above where the flow is coming from. And the results of that stand out. You can see here through the September and October monitoring periods, there were very little whitebait monitored on the far side of that culvert at all, and following the fish ladder being installed, there was hundreds of them being picked up in the different tidal cycles. So there was a huge impact of that change. There were other changes to improve the fish passage up through other parts of the catchment as well, and there's so those actions are ongoing past the end of the project. So if we look ahead to what things that might influence water quality in the coming years, a key bit would be the change from where forestry was not evident at all through the 1990s. It now has increased to occupy about half of the entire catchment. So that's really important. There's some pros and some cons to that. So the pros being that there's once that canopy is established and the roots are established, that can provide some protection against those really heavy rainfall events and reduce the amounts of sediment and kind of knock the tops of those highest flow peaks off. But there's also some risks with large areas of bare land following harvest, which will need to be managed carefully to keep high levels of sediment from entering the waterways, and there's that balance of managing that against those sudden high rainfall events. There's also the potential challenge of the transpiration of those large areas of forest, which may impact the in-stream flows. The science on that is a little bit mixed, but you might think that there's a lot of areas of these of the trees then in-stream flows may be impacted.
We'll just need to wrap it up.
Sure, yeah. So the takeaways are it's a flashy in nature, as Juliet's already alluded to with the other catchments. The management of forestry over the next over the coming rotations of those trees will be really important to help the health of the waterways and the estuary. And further down in that estuary, the enhancing the refugia for the aquatic organisms will be really important, as well as helping the fish get throughout the catchment. And it was neat to see some really neat, some great outcomes from the project.
Thank you,
And
Simon.
Take two, Waipaku Post Office Creek catchment, another small catchment. We're dealing with just it's about 16 square kilometres in East Otago, and it's defined by two distinct volcanic cones located along its northern boundary. This is very similar to the other catchments you've already heard about. Cool, dry climate. It's a small catchment. It's very steep, but it's got a significant coastal floodplain, and we've got erosion-prone soils in the catchment. Many of the soils are poorly or imperfectly drained. And this is just a few snapshots of the stream. This is right up near the headwaters. There wasn't anything flowing up here when I visited in February. This is down where many people pass it in State Highway 1. Quite weedy here and a low flow when it's not raining. And then the lower reaches just before it enters into Hawkesbury Lagoon, where it's tidal. But again, mostly we've got mostly sheep, we've got deer and cattle grazing as well, and of course the Waikouaiti township in the bottom. And a very significant estuary system in the Hawkesbury Lagoon. It's been heavily modified, similar to many other estuaries in the region. It only occupies about, I think it's about a third of what it originally had, but it still has really high ecological and cultural values, very regionally significant wetland, some great fish and birds. A key factor for the lagoon is being able to, this one is artificially managed to mitigate flood risk, and so that actually has important implications for the health of the lagoon as well. This is another one where, in terms of the stream itself, we didn't know a lot, and I think a fantastic effort was made by the catchment group, Kati Huriapa, and the Waikouaiti Primary School. 6 rounds of water sampling during 2024, 2025, and some eDNA testing, and that was focused on the lower reaches. And essentially what it showed is that, once again, we had very low levels of plant available nitrogen. Don't worry too much about these graphs. It's just this little specks of light of orange down the bottom. So most of the nitrogen that was measured in the stream is all organic. It's locked up. I think the very low nitrate levels are also reflecting that the system is probably acting a bit like a wetland, and it's denitrifying and it's being lost through to the atmosphere, and that happens when oxygen levels drop. And we see that was seen in the monitoring. Oxygen levels go down. You can see it's warm, it's stagnant a lot in the lower reaches. And that's that perfect condition to create, especially if you've got lots of carbon in the system, that will create lots of nitrogen. But equally, when you get those conditions, you also find a situation where the phosphorus can be released from the bottom sediments. And I think that's why there's so much more available phosphorus, particularly in summer in the stream. E. coli was very typical of what you get in a small rural stream, but it does increase when it rains, which isn't really a surprise. Because of those low flows and warm flows and the amount of weed in parts of the streams, the invertebrate health isn't likely to be very high. But the DNA tests that were done as part of the project found plenty of species. Some of them are pictured here. So plenty of values to look out for. The lagoon itself, it's not routinely monitored, but has been part of lots of research, particularly by the university. If you're familiar with it, you'll often see that it looks very turbid, it looks slightly green. It's got a lot of nutrient in there, and it's prone to algal blooms. But there has been measurements made after the mouth has been opened, and like I mentioned earlier, if you open the mouth, then you get that resetting of the amount of algae and nutrients in the system. Overall, it's nitrogen limited. There's less nitrogen going in than there is phosphorus. But you can see when it's closed, I mean, there's areas where this nuisance algae conditions and things can build up, and we can get the smelly sediments at times. But the flushing is a real help to the system. Takeaway messages, similar again to the other catchments. You've got some erosion-prone land in the catchment. When you get your flood events through the system, you'll get those pulses of sediment and nutrients entering the lagoon. But as I said, the periodic opening of that lagoon does improve the condition of the lagoon, and it also facilitates fish passage as well. So on the home straight, let's finish with Waikouaiti River Catchment. Same story again, isn't it? Cool, dry climate. The interesting thing with this catchment, it's got two main arms, the north branch, the southern branch, and really what you see is that rainfall's much higher in the southern branch. It's got only a third of the flow, but it's a lot more rainfall, whereas it's a lot drier in the northern branch, which extends all the way up to Macrae's gold mine. The southern branch, of course, has its headwaters in the Silver Peaks. Similar to the other rivers, can be low flows for extended periods, but when you get a flood, they can be quite large. Again, it's schist in the hill country, younger sedimentary and alluvial materials in the lower catchment, mainly sheep and beef, lots of ecological values and cultural and recreational as well, including some, I've said the Silver Peaks Reserve, but threatened species are present. The salt marsh itself is, I think it is the largest remnant of salt marsh in any estuary in Otago, so that's regionally significant as well. In terms of the Otago Regional Council's monitoring, everything's been focused in the lower reaches downstream of where the two branches have merged. It's monitored at a site called 200 metres below the DCC's water intake, and that water intake is for drinking water supply for Waikouaiti and Karatani. But in the past, there was monitoring up in the upper reaches as well, mainly for flow. The swimming water quality is monitored at Bucklands, which is obviously a popular site in summer, and also down in the estuary at the wharf. But one state of the environment site compared with the three in the Waihemo Shag Catchment. But when we were looking at water quality, we were able to pull on a whole lot of information that others have collected, and really a shout out to all these groups. I mean, well, Oceania is obviously doing this in relation to its consent up in operations of Macrae's. Some of those tributaries are in the headwaters of the northern branch. But we've got Waitaki District Council with monitoring of water supplies of Stonewood and down in the lower reaches as well. Stonewood and the DCC in the lower reaches. But also we've got Kati Hurapi ran a comprehensive analysis of all these sites in red. It was a year-long study that looked at multiple sites across the river catchment that yielded a lot of information. And also City Forests are monitoring one site as well in the lower reaches, in the upper reaches, more of the south branch, which is really important because we don't know a lot about the south branch. In terms of the key findings, I can sum water quality up very simply. Although the site's located at the bottom of the catchment, water quality is very good. You can see here, it meets all regional targets, and when you compare it with rural rivers elsewhere in New Zealand, it's in the top 25% of all of them for your common indicators shown here. The only caveat I put on this is that this is median values. Median values tend to represent, they're the middle point in your data set. They tend to reflect base flow conditions. As you know, pulses of sediment nutrients are much higher during rainfall. In terms of swimming, because that's really important in this catchment, it can get a bad rap because it's given a site of poor for swimming. It's because it's a very conservative way that the guidelines operate. The truth is, if you look at the number of times that the guidelines have been exceeded for swimming, it's not many, and that the site at Bucklands is suitable for swimming 90% of the time. Here's a plot from recent results. This is all available from LAWA. All these red circles represent the times when it was above a level that was considered suitable for swimming, and quite a clear picture that I looked at the rainfall in the 24 to 48 hours beforehand, and all but one occasion it was linked with rainfall, so the river was up, the flows were dirty, less likely for swimming to occur, and much harder to manage E. coli in those situations where it runs off the land. This is just to show you again, similar to all the other catchments, that the plant available nitrogen, the nitrogen that can stimulate algal growth and weed growth, is very low during most of the year, but you do see this big spike in winter with that first flush nitrate does pass through soils very easily. And this was picked up in the Katihuri Rapa's monitoring as well. Water temperatures in the stream do get very high. This is the site down in the lower reaches. This is just one period in 2023 where there was regularly above 21 degrees. And when you start getting above that, that gets tough for extended periods for more sensitive invertebrates like mayflies. Trout prefer cooler water as well. So that's a challenge in the catchment. And when you've got a warm river and it's quite a slow, sluggish flow and there isn't a lot of shade in places, so that just leads to conditions that can promote lots of algal growth, even though there's not a lot of nutrients. And this is just showing an extended period of low flow that can occur. So it can go for several months. So this is when it can get tough for aquatic life. So we do know that there is nuisance algae in the river. This is in the lower reaches closer to, well, of the North Branch, around Bucklands. These are mats. They look a bit like Didymo. They're similar, but this is actually a native. And I saw a complete coverage of the bed during sort of low stable flows. There is actually Didymo has been detected in the river as well, which isn't great because it is a nuisance invasive algae. These photos are not from the river, and there's not nearly like it looks like it's only ever been present in small amounts, but it's something we want to watch because it competes with all of our native species and it smothers the bed, so it's not a great thing for aquatic life. And on aquatic life, invertebrates, this is at the lower site, it will the only site down in the lower reaches. The good news is, despite being in the lower reaches and despite there being lots of algae at times upstream, the lower site does support healthy numbers of mayflies and caddisflies, which are great indicators of community health. But in general, we've got a lot of snails, worms and midges and beetles that prefer those. They're more tolerant of those warmer waters, less oxygen and more algae or fine sediment on the bed. And we do know from the monitoring that's been done in the upper reaches of the Northern Branch that we have quite a lot of poor invertebrate health again, lack of flow, but there's some stock access in some of those tributaries and challenges around those. So there's some improvements that could be made there. We don't know much about the upper South Branch. It's a bit of a knowledge gap. The monitoring that City Forest has done suggests there's some really good invertebrates, and you'd expect there would be, particularly in the headwaters where it's nice and cool, and bush and well shaded. Won't go through the fish diversity. It's monitored down at the bottom reaches by the ORC. Wonderful species, really high diversity of fish, and that's linked with the fact that there's really good fish passages through to the estuary. In terms of the estuary, this estuary is in good state. Despite this photo showing a bit of algae there, we've got really good oxygenated clean sands. There's a really stable invertebrate community. There's crabs and cockles. Cockles are great because they're filterers of water and they like clean sand. We do have some mud in the upper estuary and in the Merton Arm. It's just areas that are less well flushed. And I come back to that point that I've made throughout, that the high flows will deliver large pulses of sediment, so that's something to watch. The estuary site, good news there is it's suitable for swimming. I think it's 95% of the time. It's only when if you get really heavy rain, and that's when you should be avoiding shellfish harvest as well. So I guess the take-home messages, I apologise, I have rushed through this quite quickly, but water quality is very good. Ecological health, which it could be better. There's challenges there. With the flows and the water temperatures in particular. We also need to think about downstream waters. Good news is safe for swimming most of the time. And I'm going to hand over to Nick. I just wanted to point out, like all the catchments, nothing is static. There's things that change. There's plans to change things up in Macrae's. There's forestry harvest going on as well. And we've got climate change and changes in rainfall patterns. And I'll hand over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Juliet. So what does this tell us? We've actually got 5 catchments and some really common themes that have come out from the 5 presentations. So we know that we've got flashy, erosion-prone catchments. So we get rain events that will shift the contaminants. So those contaminants are arriving in pulses. So during dry weather, the conditions are pretty good, the water quality is pretty good, but those pulses of rain shift the sediment, phosphorus and E. coli down into the waterways. We know that every catchment in the East Otago has a receiving estuary or lagoon, but how much they're impacted depends on the degree of flushing in those estuaries and lagoons. We know we've got amazing fish throughout the catchments, but we've also learnt that in dry periods, that can stress aquatic life just as much as contaminants, and that dry periods can be quite common in East Otago. We also know in terms of solutions that the same toolkit actually works across the East Otago catchments. So stock exclusion, especially where there's impacts or it's intensive, riparian planting for shade, slowing the flow in gullies and swales so that we're reducing the chances of sediment and nutrients getting into waterways. There's also some differences across the catchments. Probably one of the main ones is with the estuaries or lagoons. So the Waihemo and Waikouaiti estuaries stay open, they're well flushed, and as a result, they're moving nutrients through that do arrive. The Hawkesbury and Anderson lagoons are often closed, and only Hawkesbury actually gets mechanically flushed, and so that has an impact on the health and the invertebrates that are found in those lagoons. And Te Hakapupu estuary sits in between. It's connected to the sea, but it's reduced to a very small extent of what it was historically. We also have got tiny catchments like Stony Creek at 9 kilometres, right up to Waihemo at 544 kilometres squared. So massive changes. We've got a mix of forestry, mining and pastoral farming. We've also got monitoring with great monitoring in places like the Waihemo catchment to Stony Creek that's got no monitoring at all. So a real variation. And we've also got the unique nature of the shag that has its groundwater zone as well. So the overall picture we've learnt from Juliet and Solace has been that actually East Otago's got really good water quality by national standards, but every catchment still has its own challenges. And I'll hand over to Steph for questions.
I've just taken note of the questions and we might just reply to those people if that's okay. I'm just conscious of time. It's pretty much bang on 1 o'clock. So thank you to those people that have written questions. I've written them down and I will get back to you. So, but just before we wrap up this webinar, I just want to point you to all of this work is now summarised into summary documents and a couple of bigger technical documents on each of our catchments. So the two documents in the white there, the water quality in the Waikouaiti and the water quality in the Waihemo Shag is the two big documents that Juliet put together, analysing all of the data on those two catchments. And then there's some very user-friendly summary documents and all of on each catchment that you can see there. And we've also prepared, which hasn't been released yet but should be, is just going through a final check, good management practices for water quality in East Otago, a summary there of what farmers, landowners and the community can do to help improve and mitigate some of these issues. And then all of this can now be found on our website, which is eocg.org.nz. You can go there and you are able to download all of those documents. If you click on our catchments, you can click on the catchment that you want the information on and it will lead you to those summaries or the bigger documents that you're after. So thank you everyone for coming along. And thank you for those that have put questions in. I will jot those down and we'll get back to you. And please, if you've got any other questions or just reach out to me, you can find my phone number and our email address on our website. So thanks everyone for coming along. Thanks.